One of the most manipulative phrases a person can use in a relationship is, "If you loved me, you would." At first glance, these words may sound reasonable. Love naturally involves sacrifice, compromise, and consideration for another person's needs. In healthy relationships, people often go out of their way to support one another because they genuinely care. However, this phrase becomes dangerous when it is used as a tool to pressure someone into doing something they are uncomfortable with. Instead of respecting your ability to make your own decisions, the speaker attaches your love to a specific action. The message is clear. If you refuse, your love is somehow inadequate. This creates a situation where affection is no longer freely given and received. It becomes a bargaining chip. Rather than discussing the issue honestly and respectfully, the other person attempts to influence your choice through guilt. Love is transformed from a bond of trust into a weapon of persuasion. The reason this phrase is so effective is because most people genuinely want to prove their love. They care deeply about the relationship and want the other person to feel valued. When someone questions that love, it creates emotional pressure. Nobody wants to be viewed as selfish, uncaring, or indifferent. Manipulative individuals understand this. They know that attacking a person's sense of devotion can make them more likely to comply. Instead of addressing the actual issue, they shift the focus toward your feelings. Suddenly, the discussion is no longer about whether the request is fair, reasonable, or healthy. The discussion becomes about proving your commitment. This emotional redirection makes it difficult to think clearly. People begin making decisions not because they believe those decisions are right, but because they fear being accused of not loving enough. Over time, this creates a pattern where guilt replaces honest communication. Healthy love respects boundaries. Every person has limits, values, beliefs, and personal convictions that deserve respect. A mature partner understands that love does not require complete agreement on every issue. They recognize that two individuals can care deeply for each other while maintaining different perspectives and boundaries. The phrase, "If you loved me, you would," often ignores this reality. It assumes that love should automatically override personal comfort, judgment, or principles. It places one person's desires above the other person's autonomy. This is where many relationships begin to lose balance. Instead of encouraging mutual understanding, one person starts demanding compliance. Boundaries become obstacles to overcome rather than limits to respect. The pressure may start with small requests, but once the pattern is established, it can gradually expand into larger and more significant areas of life. What begins as emotional persuasion can eventually become emotional control. Another troubling aspect of this phrase is that it often creates a false connection between love and obedience. Genuine love is voluntary. It grows through trust, respect, and shared experiences. Obedience, on the other hand, is based on compliance with another person's wishes. When someone repeatedly says, "If you loved me, you would," they blur the line between these two concepts. They suggest that the proof of your love is your willingness to do whatever they ask. This creates an unhealthy standard because no relationship can function properly when one person's desires become the measure of the other's devotion. Love is not demonstrated by abandoning your own needs every time someone makes a demand. It is demonstrated through honesty, loyalty, respect, and care. A person who constantly equates love with obedience is not seeking partnership. They are seeking influence. They want the power to shape your decisions by making you feel responsible for their emotional satisfaction. The long-term effects of this kind of manipulation can be significant. Many people who are exposed to it repeatedly begin questioning their own instincts. They stop asking themselves whether a request is appropriate and start asking whether refusing it makes them a bad partner. This shift in thinking can lead to emotional exhaustion. Every decision becomes loaded with guilt. Every disagreement feels like a test of loyalty. The relationship slowly transforms into an environment where one person feels responsible for constantly proving their love. This burden becomes heavier over time because the demands rarely stop. Once someone learns that guilt is an effective tool, they often continue using it. The other person may find themselves sacrificing more and more while receiving less understanding in return. Their own needs become secondary because they are constantly focused on avoiding accusations of selfishness or lack of commitment. At its core, the phrase, "If you loved me, you would," reveals a misunderstanding of what love truly is. Love does not thrive under pressure. It cannot be strengthened through emotional coercion. The The strongest relationships are built on freedom, where both people feel safe expressing themselves honestly without fear of punishment or guilt. When someone genuinely loves you, they may make requests, express desires, or communicate needs, but they do not use your feelings as leverage. They respect your right to think independently and make decisions according to your own values. They understand that disagreement does not automatically mean a lack of love. Real affection creates space for individuality. It allows two people to remain true to themselves while building a meaningful connection together. The moment love becomes a tool for manipulation, it loses the very qualities that make it powerful. What remains is not a relationship based on trust and respect, but one shaped by emotional pressure, where guilt replaces understanding and control disguises itself as affection. One of the most damaging and revealing statements a person can make is, "Nobody else would put up with you." These words are not spoken to encourage growth, solve a problem, or strengthen a relationship. Their purpose is far more destructive. They are designed to attack your sense of worth. Instead of addressing a specific issue, the speaker targets your entire value as a person. The message hidden within this statement is that you are difficult, flawed, unlovable, or somehow lucky that anyone is willing to stay with you at all. It is a phrase that attempts to replace confidence with insecurity. Rather than helping you see your strengths, it encourages you to focus on your perceived weaknesses. The more often a person hears these words, the more likely they are to begin questioning their own value. What starts as a hurtful comment can gradually evolve into a belief that shapes how they see themselves and every relationship in their life. The power of this statement comes from its ability to create fear. Human beings naturally desire connection, acceptance, and belonging. The thought of being rejected or abandoned can be deeply unsettling. Manipulative people understand this reality and use it to their advantage. By suggesting that nobody else would tolerate you, they create the fear that leaving the relationship would result in loneliness. They want you to believe that your options are limited and that your chances of finding happiness elsewhere are extremely small. Once this fear takes hold, it becomes easier to accept treatment that would otherwise be unacceptable. People begin tolerating disrespect because they worry there is nothing better available. They remain in situations that diminish them because they have been convinced that they should be grateful for whatever affection they receive. Fear becomes the chain that keeps them emotionally trapped. What makes this phrase particularly harmful is that it often appears gradually rather than all at once. In the beginning, it may be disguised as a joke, a sarcastic comment, or a moment of frustration during an argument. The speaker may even laugh afterward or claim they did not mean it seriously. But repeated exposure changes its impact. Every time the words are spoken, they leave a small mark on a person's confidence. Over weeks, months, or years, those marks accumulate. The individual begins replaying the statement in their mind during moments of self-doubt. They start wondering whether there is some truth behind it. Eventually, they may begin seeing themselves through the eyes of the person who constantly criticizes them. Instead of recognizing their strengths, achievements, and positive qualities, they become fixated on their flaws. This internal shift is exactly what makes the statement so dangerous. It transforms an external attack into an internal belief. A healthy relationship has the opposite effect on a person's self-image. When someone genuinely cares about you, they do not spend their time convincing you that you are difficult to love. They help you recognize your value even during moments when you struggle to see it yourself. They encourage growth without attacking your identity. They may point out mistakes, but they do not define you by them. The phrase, "nobody else would put up with you," does the opposite. It reduces an entire human being to their imperfections. It ignores strengths, accomplishments, acts of kindness, and positive qualities. It creates a distorted picture in which flaws become the only thing that matters. This distortion serves a purpose. The less confident you become, the easier it is for someone to maintain influence over you. People who understand their worth are far less likely to accept mistreatment. People who doubt their worth often tolerate far more than they should. There is also a deeper insecurity hidden behind this statement. Truly confident individuals rarely feel the need to convince others that they are undesirable. Secure people do not strengthen relationships by weakening another person's self-esteem. In many cases, the person making the statement fears losing control. They recognize that if you fully understood your own value, you might begin questioning the relationship itself. You might recognize opportunities, possibilities, and connections beyond their influence. By attacking your confidence, they attempt to reduce the likelihood of that happening. The statement becomes less about describing reality and more about shaping it. They want you to believe that your future without them would be empty, because that belief benefits them. The more dependent you become emotionally, the more secure their position feels. What sounds like criticism is often a strategy designed to maintain power. Over time, hearing this phrase repeatedly can change the way a person approaches every aspect of life. It can affect friendships, professional opportunities, family relationships, and personal ambitions. Someone who constantly hears that they are difficult to tolerate may become hesitant to express opinions, pursue goals, or build new connections. They may enter every interaction expecting rejection before it even occurs. Their confidence shrinks because they have been conditioned to see themselves as a burden rather than a valuable individual. This is the true damage of statements like, "Nobody else would put up with you." They are not merely insults spoken in a moment of anger. They are attempts to reshape a person's identity. The goal is not simply to win an argument, but to create dependence by weakening self-belief. The more someone accepts this message, the more disconnected they become from the truth of their own worth, their own strengths, and their own ability to be appreciated, respected, and valued by others. One of the most revealing phrases a person can say is, "I don't owe anyone an explanation." At first, these words may sound strong, independent, and confident. In some situations, they can even be reasonable. Every individual has a right to privacy, personal space, and boundaries. Nobody is required to explain every thought, every decision, or every moment of their life to others. However, the meaning of this phrase changes completely when it is repeatedly used within a close relationship to avoid accountability. Relationships are built on communication, trust, and understanding. When someone consistently refuses to explain their actions, especially when those actions affect other people, they create confusion instead of clarity. Rather than helping the relationship grow stronger, they build walls that prevent honest connection. What begins as a claim of independence can become a method of avoiding responsibility. Trust does not appear automatically. It develops through consistent honesty over time. When two people share a meaningful connection, they naturally expect a certain level of openness from each other. This does not mean surrendering all privacy, but it does mean being willing to communicate when questions arise. If someone's actions create concern, uncertainty, or doubt, a simple conversation can often resolve the issue. The phrase, "I don't owe anyone an explanation," shuts that conversation down before it begins. Instead of addressing legitimate concerns, the speaker dismisses them entirely. They imply that questioning their behavior is inappropriate, regardless of the circumstances. This creates an environment where one person is expected to provide trust without receiving transparency in return. Over time, this imbalance can weaken the foundation of the relationship because trust requires participation from both sides. One of the biggest problems with this attitude is that it confuses privacy with secrecy. Privacy is healthy. Every person deserves aspects of life that remain personal and protected. Secrecy is different. Secrecy involves intentionally withholding information that directly affects another person or the relationship itself. Mature individuals understand the difference between maintaining personal boundaries and avoiding important conversations. Someone who constantly declares that they owe no explanations often uses privacy as a shield against accountability. Whenever difficult questions arise, they retreat behind the idea of personal freedom rather than addressing the actual issue. This pattern makes it difficult to establish emotional security because uncertainty continues to grow while honest communication continues to decrease. The relationship becomes filled with unanswered questions, assumptions, and doubts that could have been resolved through simple openness. Another reason this phrase can be harmful is because it places all emotional responsibility on the other person. Imagine being affected by someone's decisions, behavior, or actions only to be told that you do not deserve an explanation. Your feelings become irrelevant. Your concerns are dismissed. Your need for clarity is treated as a problem rather than a reasonable response. This creates frustration because communication is one of the primary ways people resolve misunderstandings and maintain trust. When someone refuses to explain themselves under any circumstances, they remove an essential tool for conflict resolution. Problems remain unresolved, not because solutions do not exist, but because one person refuses to participate in the conversation. Over time, this can create emotional distance. The relationship becomes less about understanding each other and more about avoiding difficult discussions. People who repeatedly rely on this phrase often fail to recognize how their silence affects others. They focus exclusively on their own right to remain unexplained while ignoring the impact their actions may have. Relationships involve more than individual freedom. They involve consideration, empathy, and mutual respect. Every decision made within a close relationship has the potential to affect another person. A mature individual understands this and is willing to communicate when necessary. They do not view explanations as a burden. They view them as part of maintaining trust. Explaining yourself does not automatically mean surrendering control or independence. In many cases, it is simply an act of respect. It demonstrates that you value the relationship enough to provide clarity rather than leaving the other person confused or uncertain. Someone who consistently refuses this level of communication may be prioritizing their comfort over the health of the relationship. The deeper issue behind the statement, "I don't owe anyone an explanation," is often a resistance to accountability. Accountability requires vulnerability. It requires a person to discuss their choices, acknowledge mistakes, and answer difficult questions when necessary. Not everyone is comfortable with this process. Some people would rather avoid discomfort altogether. Instead of engaging in honest conversations, they create rules that protect them from scrutiny. By insisting that no explanation is ever required, they eliminate opportunities for self-reflection and growth. The problem is that relationships cannot thrive without accountability. Trust grows when actions and words align. Respect grows when people are willing to communicate openly. Emotional security grows when questions are answered rather than ignored. A person who refuses every explanation may believe they are protecting their freedom, but they are often creating distance instead. The unwillingness to communicate honestly does not strengthen relationships. It weakens them by replacing understanding with uncertainty, transparency with confusion, and connection with emotional separation.